You're tuned in to Positively Terrible. I'm producer Dan, and each week my buddy Scott and I discuss surviving and thriving after trauma. It's a journey that started when Scott, his wife's fiance, and her boyfriend walked into a bar. This week's decent human being is Harris. They've got a fucked up story about overcoming trauma and helping others heal. Settle in, my terrible listeners. Today's episode is going to be positively terrible.
I was nervous and stressed because I thought you were the best. I was right.
Hey, Scott.
Hey, producer Dan. How you doing this morning?
Man, I'm doing pretty well. Had some food poisoning yesterday and getting over it, but I am standing up and things are moving in all the right direction through my body today. So big win.
All right, I'm glad to hear it. I was a little bit worried about you. I mean, not
very kind.
I was just going to say mostly because I didn't want to miss an interview.
Nor do I.
I figured you'd get it. What did you eat, Dan? How did this happen?
I don't have all the answers. There were a couple suspect things.
Okay,
but nothing definitive.
That baggie you pulled out of the fridge that didn't have a date or name on it, is that probably what it was?
Well, my wife loves to throw things out that are in the fridge and like one day expired, and this is just one more reason for her to think that that's appropriate. So
okay, well, this sounds very much like a Simpsons episode where Homer fell in love with this large sandwich and ate it for way too long. Episode. Yeah, I think that is kind of what I'm hearing here. Well, good. I'm glad you're feeling better. I am here and ready. Got a new haircut just for the show, and by a new haircut.
In fact, I went to your guy.
Oh, he told me that. He was like, "Thanks for recommending or referring your friend." I was like, "Who the hell was that?"
That was me. Look at this.
And he said, "Your podcast guy," and I was like, "I never told you about my podcast." So now he knows about my podcast. So yeah, hopefully he'll be listening. But anyway, we're rambling a little bit. Was there anything before when we were talking, Dan? Really quickly, you said, "I'm going to save that for the show." Was there something? Do you remember what that was?
We have a visitor this week at my house.
Oh, okay.
It is Harry the guinea pig from my kids' school library. Harry goes home with somebody else every week, and our dog Lando can't stop staring at the guinea pig. He will sit in the kitchen and just stare. Sometimes he'll lift his little paw up and fold it back like he's some kind of hunting dog, but he will just stare intently at the guinea pig, and he's been doing it for about 30 hours.
Okay. So what's the over-under on the number of times that they've had to buy a replacement identical guinea pig?
I can tell you that Harry was with us last year for a weekend. Although very much the same colors, this Harry has a very different attitude than the last Harry. I'm pretty sure that happens a fair amount.
I'm okay. Well, that sounds very traumatic. And speaking of, Harris is here today. Harris, how are you?
Hey, I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. And Harris, where are you located? I think you're the furthest away that we've had a guest call us from.
I'm in Hertfordshire in England.
Hertfordshire in England. Okay.
That explains why you sound so smart.
Oh, thank you. It may just be the accent, but you decide for yourselves.
Well, it's definitely a good start.
We'll certainly be judging the words that come out now, just to make sure that our belief is true. Harris, so why are you here with us today? What are we going to talk about today?
Trauma and how to get over it, basically.
Okay, we're pretty well versed on the experiencing trauma side over here. We like to think that we do get over it, that we do grow and process and know how to manage it. But of course, it's different for everybody. And while I might be over here saying that I'm a well-adjusted human being, Dan's opinion of me, see, I didn't even have to, he's shaking his head no. and we're just going to pretend that I'm right and Dan's wrong today. But Harris, tell us a little bit about you then. When we're talking about trauma, I'm going to assume here, and I know we've talked a little bit before, that you are, like the rest of us, experiencing some of that trauma. So can you tell us a little bit about your life and some of the traumas that you've been through?
Yeah, sure. So I think it mostly falls into two categories. Firstly, the simple PTSD, which is when you're like, I'm fucked up because a very specific thing happened. You can easily pinpoint it. You know, when you get triggered, you're like, it's because of that specific thing. Really easy to identify that. And for me, it was sexual trauma. So the first time I was 10, the second time I was in my teens with an abusive partner who, in my best guess, was that he was also sort of malignant sociopath narcissist or something.
Mm-hmm.
And the third time I was in my 20s on a first date and it went wrong. So there was that side of the kind of simple PTSD. It was really easy for me to be like, I'm fucked up because that specific thing happened.
Okay.
So I had that treated in like 2 hours. We can come back to the specifics of that, but just to continue the kind of overview, I also, turns out, had complex PTSD from my upbringing, my family of origin. I come from a very funny family. We all hang out quite a lot. We spend a fair amount of time together. And at the same time, there's a huge amount of trauma and poor boundary function, all kinds of stuff. I mean, I think everyone in my family's matured now, but you know, how the family looked and operated when I was a kid and a teenager and even in my 20s was pretty fucked up. And I think me going to get my trauma sorted out and being on this sort of self-development sort of journey for the last 10 years since that all got triggered off by a bit of cancer that I had. That was a whole thing. But in me doing this and moving forward, I'm gradually dragging my family with me, whether they want to or not.
I feel like, and I'm sorry, I'm going to make light a little bit, which is what we do, but I feel like I need a chalkboard here, and I'm going to put a notch down for sexual trauma, family trauma, cancer, medical trauma. Is there anything else that any other path we could go down this time?
Yeah, I mean, I guess there's some other things. You know, I've been in abusive relationships. Sure. I suffered a physical paralysis when I was in my later teens. I was in physiotherapy for about a year. I got fired a lot. I'm neurodivergent, so and also entrepreneurial, and that's part of my personality. So, as an employee, I'm very annoying. And
well, Dan and I are both. Me too. But Dan and I are both ADHD. Dan used to work for me, so
and I was annoying the whole time.
There were times when you were on lunch; it was fine.
Yeah. And then I guess, you know, there's the whole queer thing. I guess when I was younger, there are always signs that I was non-binary and, you know, didn't care about the gender of the people I had crushes on and stuff. But, you know, and I feel pretty chilled out about all of that. It is what it is. It's not that exciting. I don't feel like it's the most significant thing about me as a human being, but it does bring with it a lot of trouble, unfortunately. So.
Well, it sounds like you have some expertise in trauma. And now that we're talking...
At least experience.
Yeah, which is, I mean, that's what we're here for, right? To get the story of where you started and how you are, you know, the decent human being that you are today.
Thanks.
Absolutely. Scott, you made a brow.
Yeah, well... Dan and I are looking at each other through the camera like, is he talking or am I talking? So it looked like you were going to keep going. I opened my mouth. Anyway, nobody needs to hear all of that. But Harris,
put a marker in right there.
You said a couple of things that I find very interesting. And I kind of want to right now delve into the family side, because you started by saying, you know, our family jokes a lot. We we do things. I don't know the exact words you used, but it clearly, or at least it sounded to me like you're saying, yeah, there was a lot of joking, but maybe things weren't being done or said in the best ways, or the behaviors might have been more harmful than people had realized. And I'm just making some assumptions here, but can you kind of dive into that a little bit and explain
Yeah.
what you meant by those relationships?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. When we as a family having fun, we're hilarious. People like being around that. We make a lot of
Okay.
like naughty jokes, or we say things that other people wouldn't dare say, but it's true for everyone, you know.
For sure.
When you know, us in my generation have brought round new partners, you know, for a Sunday lunch, that's a very traditional thing for us, then it's not uncommon for the conversation to turn into very practiced and polished toilet humor. So
Okay.
that happens sometimes.
Okay.
But ultimately, it's just, you know, like humor is very much a skill and a passion for the people in my family. The parts where it's fallen down a lot in the past is where mental health, emotional well-being, healthy relationships, boundaries, all that sort of thing comes in. Growing up, there was a lot of control and fear, threats of violence, alcohol misuse. Through my teens, my brother he was born a little while before my 12th birthday. I'm the eldest of three. Through my teens, there were a lot of times when my parents on a school night would be out drinking, and I would be there in charge of my sister, who's only 2 and a bit years younger than me, and it's not a big gap. And then my brother, who was a toddler or a baby.
Wow.
So I'd be doing a lot of the kind of, I'd be the third parent, and then often my parents might get home, be drunk or arguing. And then often I would be getting into trouble at school for not having done my homework when there was no time. There was no time to do that. And from the age of about 13 onwards, that was kind of when all of that kind of trouble had started. And I was often being the listening ear for my parents individually. I was also witness to some things that I didn't understand because I was too young and didn't know how to navigate that. And I found that very upsetting.
Mm-hmm.
And that was around the age that self-harm started to come into the picture, suicidal ideation. I'd started going to counselling and stuff because nobody else was. You know, things were really in the shitter, and for many years, but it didn't. Nobody. It's really interesting to me now. I think if that was going on now, and I was an adult looking at that happening to a child, I would know that this was a safeguarding issue. This would be a cause for kind of getting the right people involved and supporting those children. But at the time, I was just on my own with it for years, and I think I had such a low opinion of myself because, on the one hand, I was doing all of this stuff. I was performing such a vital function for my family, and at the same time, the only feedback I ever got was criticism. So it was kind of this idea that actually you can give your life for your family and they can still think and tell you that you're a piece of shit and take out all their frustrations on you and be annoyed when you're falling short of perfection and stuff like that. Like it was a total mindfuck to be in that situation. And then by the time I was 16, I ended up going out with this guy, and it was just more dysfunction, more of the same. Again, like boundaries didn't exist. And, you know, as someone who was very much a bleeding heart and a doormat and was just trying to survive, I was the perfect match for somebody who was completely self-orientated and wanted someone to control and abuse and treat badly. So it was just a total fucking shit show.
Yeah, it sounds like it, and I'm so sorry, and I'm you know that I find myself repeating those words to a lot of our guests. That I'm so sorry, and of course it's genuine, and there's a lot of things that I feel when when I'm saying that, but every time I hear about people whose childhood was taken away from them, it really hurts. It does, and I'm sorry that you experienced that. You said that you would like to think that you would recognize this, what was occurring, if you were an adult who saw this going on. And
Mm.
I guess my question there is, what do you mean by that? Were there adults who witnessed what was happening or you shared with what was happening in your life? Or are you saying that they maybe should have recognized some of your behaviors and started questioning what was creating those behaviors?
I think a bit of both. I mean, there were times when notes were sent to school from my parents to the school to say things right now are really hard for us. If you could like ease up on Harris a little bit with the homework requests and just, just try and be a bit understanding. They were like, oh, fair enough. But there was no like, is everything okay at home? What does that look like for you? Do you want to share that? Do you have support? Do you need counselling? I mean, here, when you go to school, so years 10 and 11 are the academic years that you turn 15 and 16.
Okay.
And those are the years that you do roughly around 10 subjects at a GCSE level is what we call it. So you have at the end of year 11 is when you have all of your exams and obviously people are hoping that you do well, and these form like a core part of your kind of qualifications in your education.
Mhm.
And the year before that, we had mock exams over the space of 2 weeks for all the subjects that we were taking. And during that first week, I was drunk for the entire thing. I was 15. And amazingly, I did really well in my exams. And I've never been a big drinker, but I think at that point, I don't know, it just felt like a bit of a brain holiday. I don't know how else to describe it. And I went to my head of year at that point, and I said to her, so that first week of the mock exams, I was drunk and I don't actually remember the exams. And she was like, oh, do you think that you might need to speak to somebody? And I was like, well, yeah, I've been saying this for a couple of years already. And she said, well, I won't get you in trouble if you agree to go to counselling. I was like, sure. So I did, but I look back at that now and I was like, that's insane. That's insane that you've got a kid being like, I got drunk for a whole week because I needed some escape from what I was feeling. And they were like, oh, well, I won't get you in trouble. Like, where's the investigation? Where are social services in this?
Right. And I was just going to say that I would assume that in Europe that it was similar to the way that it would normally be handled in the United States, which is get DCFS involved and family services and everything to start an investigation. Now, I'm not going to speak to how well they do or don't do their jobs once they're called in, because they're very, very underfunded from my understanding.
Yeah.
However, there would be, in theory, if all the right things are done, there would be a hell of a lot more done than, are you okay? Do you want counseling?
Yeah.
Now,
exactly.
What I will say is I do like that they said, we won't get you in trouble. I do think that, at least in my opinion, that the punishment for doing something like that would be more harmful than anything, because clearly there are much deeper issues than, oh, somebody had some drinks.
Mm.
So,
but I feel like in this scenario, I feel like you won't get in trouble if you go get some help. Like, I don't know. I feel like what they should have said was, oh my God, you're not in trouble. Let's go get you the help that you need.
Okay. That's fair. And I guess
seems like a weird carrot to put out when someone clearly needs assistance.
Yeah, and the point that I was just making, though, is that it needed some touch, and it sounds like maybe the right touch wasn't used, but also when I look at, especially like when I look at the drug epidemic, I feel like a lot of times people don't get help because drugs are illegal.
Yeah.
So that means I'm a criminal, and that means I'll get in trouble. And then it's easier to try to deal with it on your own. So we're going down a path that we don't need to go down right now. But I just wanted to say that I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm glad there wasn't a threat of punishment, or I guess maybe there was a little bit if it was contingent on getting help. But counseling. So I will say that you've been given the offer of counseling. What does that look like? Does that go through the school? Does that go through some outside organization? How do you do counseling?
I mean, at that point, I think when I was 13, I went to see the school counsellor, and these sessions were about 20 minutes. And this woman had lipstick on her teeth and looked like she was, barely present. And she would just ask the most mind-numbingly stupid questions. And I didn't get on with her. So I said to my teacher, who was sort of offering this support, she said, go, there was a charity that was literally down the road from our school. She says, you can go there, like they're approved. So I went to see this woman. I think she was training. So this was one of her sort of, you have to get so many hours in when you're a new counsellor.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very dry. There wasn't a lot going on there. But the moment that I happened to mention my childhood sexual assault, she got very excited. This was going to be a really interesting day of work for her. And I felt quite objectified, and that she was getting a kick out of having an interesting day at work when I was sharing something that I hadn't shared with many adults before.
Wow. I understand. I am very uncomfortable sometimes when I'm talking to people about this show, because there are times when we're talking about some very serious things and I get excited about an episode we're releasing, and it feels like what you're describing. Like I feel guilty that I am taking someone's traumas and getting excited about it, and it's not really what I'm doing. It's that I'm excited to share the story and have an episode with someone. It's a decent fucking human, but it's such an uncomfortable fucking thing. And for someone to clearly show you that they're excited about maybe a new topic. And you said that, did I hear you right, that this person was in training or at some part of their career where they needed the hours?
Yeah.
So for them, it's like, another check on the resume is what it sounds like to me.
Yeah, potentially. But it was just so, I from a professional perspective, and obviously I help people with their trauma. I listen to, I hear all of that. I get the excitement of working with somebody new, but I can't imagine that someone, a young person, a 15-year-old would say, I was sexually assaulted when I was 10, and growing this massive smile across my face and sitting up in my chair and being like, oh my God, this is amazing. Tell me. Like, it was so fucked up.
So let me, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say.
I am terrible at this. I'm going to mute my mic for a second. Go ahead, Harris.
No, I guess it was just like, it was just such an odd thing to witness. And it really put me off sharing anymore, because I was like, I'm sharing something that's really hard to share. This is really difficult. And all she's doing is just getting really excited. I got that it was a professional thing. It wasn't that I thought she was a freak. I was just like, this is completely inappropriate. Like, right. You've got to have some level of poker face. Like, this is not okay.
Yes,
for sure.
I years ago, I was a paramedic, and paramedic school was the same. Everybody, every 22-year-old paramedic goes to paramedic school because, you watched some TV show about it, and it's very exciting looking. And turns out most paramedic stuff is all medical, and it's pretty boring. But every once in a while, there's a trauma, and somebody's really hurt. And the students that were with us, whenever there was a trauma, is the same thing. We had to remind them, like, remember, we're going in here. Put your game face on. This is not exciting for these people that we're working with.
Mm.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm at a loss a little bit. I mean, the most basic thing is to treat other humans like they're humans. And it sounds like you were reduced down to this case that she was going to be talking about.
Yeah.
And I can see, well, I mean, I would immediately lose faith in that person. So how long did you speak with her?
I don't think I was there for that long. It won't have been more than a handful of months, I suppose.
Okay.
And by the time I was about 19, I was then really suicidal. That was kind of I was getting towards the sort of 3 years being with this abusive partner. The stuff with my home life had really ramped up, and I was just like, there's no way a human being can suffer this much with this many people for this many years. Like, I couldn't find a way out. I kept asking people for help. I'd been to my GPs. I even went to my GP and I said, listen, death is looking quite inviting at the moment, but I want to sort this out. I want to face this and get some help. And he said, listen, you're near the end of college. I did a year of college after I finished school at 18 to prepare me to go and study art at degree level. And this was during that year. And the stuff with my then partner, he was just getting like just crazier and crazier. And I mean that literally. The gaslighting and the psychological torture was like next level. Mm-hmm. And I said to this GP, I said, listen, I'm at my wit's end. Like, I'm surprised I'm here today. And he said, well, you're going to university in 6 months. Like, it's not going to be that long. I said, I'm surprised I'm here for one more day. Like, I need help now. And he just wouldn't listen. And I think within about a month or so of that conversation, I was in A&E. I had been interrupted at an attempt. And I was in this grey room. I was really dissociated by that point. And I just saw these people in white coats. I don't even think I looked at their faces. And they said, we're trying to decide whether to section you or not. I said, I have been asking for help at this point for 6 years. I was 19 at this point. I've been asking for help for 6 years. This is way more. I don't know what is wrong with me, but this is way more than a little bit of anxiety and depression. Like, mm-hmm. I'm going through it. This is a big problem. And I've been asking and asking and asking, at what point is anyone going to listen? They said, if we promise to get you help, do you promise that you won't attempt this again? I said, yeah, absolutely. But I said, I'm losing faith at this point because nobody's taken me seriously. I've asked. I've been to my GP multiple times. And so...
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I've got a problem with that question too. If we get you help, would you promise not to... What the fuck is that? Just get this human help, please. And I am incredibly impressed right now. So many people never ask for help.
Mm.
And a lot of us know people who have died by suicide.
Yeah.
And so many people just wish that their friend or loved one had asked for help once.
Mm.
And here you are, 13 to 19, at an age where people don't ask for help. I guess at a lot of ages, people don't ask for help. And you're reaching out. And
yeah,
you're getting nothing in return. So did that change when you made this promise? When you said, yes, if you help, I won't make any attempts on my life? I think, and I'm sorry, I'm not putting words in your mouth, right? That was the scenario?
Yes.
That they're
yes.
making a promise? Okay. So Is that when you got help?
I went to go and see this psychiatrist, and I think I got her for 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she was really struggling to grasp what it was that I was dealing with. And she was just a bit like, I don't really know what to do with you. And I think the one bit of advice she gave me that actually worked, she talked about how when I tried to hold people to their promises, hold them accountable for what they said they would do, that I was scared. And she said, how people react or feel when you hold them accountable for something they have already agreed to do is not your responsibility. That was the one thing that came back to me, that I was like, well, you're the first person that said that, and that's really helpful. But other than that, it was close to useless. And then sure enough, I did go to uni. I moved away. Excuse me. And that did help. I broke up with my partner. I wasn't with my parents. And it was really weird because I had this enormous, like, physiological, like, nervous system reset. The first 2 weeks that I was away from home, I slept like I hadn't slept my whole life.
Okay.
It was absolutely incredible. And with that came this enormous guilt and enormous heartbreak that I had abandoned my siblings, who at that point felt like my own children. And I didn't know how my sister, she was now the oldest child in the house. And since I had left, I was like, how is she going to cope with this? I haven't prepared her. I haven't even told, so much. I was the buffer between my parents and my siblings so much of the time. And at that point, I was close to, I'd been close to giving up for so long. I was like, I just need to get out of there. I hadn't even thought I have to prepare my sister for what she's going to be faced with.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt like I'd let them both down massively. My brother at that point he just turned 6 or 7. Maybe he was 7. But yeah, he was still little. And I felt horrific leaving both of them. But then I had this kind of renaissance of these kind of, about the first year that I was away, maybe year and a half, I had this crazy time where I tried things. I did stupid things. I slept around a little bit. I went to be a stripper for 5 months, which was absolutely hilarious. One of the funniest jobs I've ever had. And, I dated, and I tried cocaine a few times. It turns out I liked it a bit too much, so I knew that I couldn't. I had to step away from that.
Okay.
But, it was fine. I was responsible. It got to the point where I was like, yeah, I'm getting a bit too into this, so I'm just going to step back. And I never touched it again. It was fine. It wasn't a big deal. But yeah, I just had all these adventures and actually got to live for myself for a little bit, and then got really in trouble. I got involved with this guy. So I think, like, looking back, I was so divorced from my intuition, from what my body was telling me, all of that stuff, because of what I'd had to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And when I met this guy, he was all kinds of mixed up. He came from a very religious family. He was a mixed race black adoptee child to his parents. He had a huge amount of trauma that he medicated with heroin, but I didn't know that to begin with.
Wow.
He seemed really together. He was just like a mature student when I met him. He believed that whilst he was legally divorced from his wife, that they were still spiritually married, and therefore he couldn't be with anyone else. And he said that he was interested, and I said, you don't seem available, so it's going to be a no from me. And then he turned around and said, no, I want to go out with you. Just don't be a psycho.
Okay.
that whole thing. It didn't last a very long time, but it was a complete disaster. I got pregnant at one point. and that terrified the life out of me. And then I found out that he had this heroin problem, and I was still very much in the grips of trauma. Like I had really no money or nothing to offer a child. And then I found out about his drug problem, and he already had 2 kids from his marriage that he didn't see because he wouldn't submit himself for drug testing. And I was just like, this whole thing is an absolute disaster.
Yeah.
So I did the only thing I thought was the right thing to do, and ended the pregnancy. That whole thing haunted me for about the next 5 years.
Okay.
Not that I regretted it, but I then, after that, everything fell apart. I lost my job and my house, and he and I split up and all this other stuff. And I came back home. I started to pull myself together. Dated a few more shit people, but it was much less dramatic than heroin addiction and stuff.
Yeah, I'd imagine so. Usually by the time we get to heroin, we're on the other side. The really kind of, this is going downhill.
Yeah, it was a pretty sobering, interestingly, situation to be in. So I went home. I started to get my shit together. I went self-employed because all of the jobs I was trying to have, it was just a nightmare. I didn't fit in. They were stressed. I was stressed. I went self-employed. And then at 25, I got a little bit of cancer. That was the moment that everything changed. Like,
okay.
At this point, you're like, how are you still alive? And I don't know. But,
well, I'm sorry. I laughed because you said a little bit of cancer. That's better than a lot of bit of cancer.
It's true.
Yeah. So was it caught early then? Is that what you mean by a little bit of cancer? Or is that just a cheesy way of saying it?
No, it wasn't. Like, I went at 25 here, you get called in for your first pap smear test, as we call it.
Okay.
And they were like, yeah, we found early cancer. And I was like, fucking brilliant. Okay.
Okay. Just add it to the list.
Yeah. And so they did a biopsy. They were like, yes, we've confirmed it with the biopsy. Then I went in and they cut it out. That whole thing was a whole lot, like, it was dreadful, but it was simple. They cut it out. I went back 6 months later. They tested me. They were like, yeah, it's all gone. You're like, well done.
Okay.
I was like, thank you for that.
You finally caught a break.
Yeah, but that week, this is what happened. That week that I got the letter in the post, in the mail, that said we found early cancer, I was like, fuck my actual life. I was so angry and scared, and I was going out with this woman at this time, and she, by that point, my heart was dead in, like, I was numb by that point. I was there for her comfort, and so she wasn't alone, but she didn't meet a single one of my needs. When I arrived at her house, her front door was on the latch and I let myself in. If I asked for a hug, it'd be, do I have to? Okay. You know, she was very narcissistic, very immature.
Yeah.
And that week, I got this letter that said we found it. That week, all of my family were abroad or on holiday or something. I was on my own in the house. That week, I ditched her. Within, I think, a month or two, I broke up off one of my main friends, which that friendship had become very toxic. I stopped being a doormat. I woke up. And what's happened in those last 10 years is that I've gone through trauma therapy twice. I had my PTSD treated in 2 hours. I had my complex PTSD treated in a matter of months. And they're gone, literally. There's no... It's gone. Like, I haven't had a relapse. Like, for me to share all of this stuff is not hard for me. I'm just sharing a fact of what happened.
Sure. And you're,
yeah.
I was gonna say, and you're doing an incredible job. The lesson I'm learning here, aside from you being a decent fucking human and all of the things that we look for, is, again, I learned this lesson over and over, is I just need to shut the fuck up and listen. Because I feel like I've talked over you a handful of times, and you've got this. You are telling an incredible story. It hasn't gone through the doors that maybe I expected it to, but I'm so grateful that you've been sharing this with us. And again, I'm just going to shut the hell up, because I just interrupted once again to just tell you how much I'm enjoying this. But yeah, so, and I do want to specifically ask, you say when you got the cancer, that's when things changed. Is this where it's going for the better? Is that what you're telling us? It sounds like
Yeah.
it sounds like that's what you're telling us.
It was such a pivotal moment because up until that point, I hadn't had the luxury or the thought or even the concept that I should care about what happened to me. Getting cancer was the part that said, hello, you could have lost yourself. You could have died from this. If you hadn't have, accepted the invitation to go and get this routine test done, you could have been dead within a year. And suddenly I was like, oh, this shit matters. Like, I can't keep operating in this way of like, not even thinking about myself once, and of expecting my body and my health and everything else to just be this permanent fixed thing, because it isn't. And
Well, what I'm impressed right now is that from someone who at points wanted to take their life, that having an incident, a scare like this with cancer, that it sounds like it motivated you to say, hey, I need to change things.
yeah, well, taking your own life is your choice, but getting cancer is not, right? And I think life was like, you need to stop this. Like, you need to start caring about what happens to you. This is not a guarantee. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. And you could get ill. Like, you can't perform this function. You can't be the mortar between the bricks constantly.
Mm-hmm.
And it just woke me up. And since then, there's so many different schools of thought that have informed my healing, as well as the trauma treatment that I've had. And I educate a lot on how you actually fix trauma and not just talk about it, because for so many of us in our minds and how our culture operates is that the golden standard of mental health care is therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think good therapy can change a life, but I think trauma treatment saves a life in a way that it's not the same thing. It's a different thing.
Okay.
By the time I had my simple PTSD treated, it was a total like fluke or divine intervention or whatever you want to call it, that I was even in a situation where that could happen. I had gone to a local, regular therapist and said, I'm having a relapse of anxiety. Can I come? And she's like, yeah. And during that time, during that assessment, she said, and you mentioned your PTSD. What do you want to do about that? And I said, I've been asking everyone for help with that for years, and they're fucking like chocolate teapots, completely useless. Like, and she said, well, you can get rid of it. And I was like, really? She's like, yeah. And I said, why hasn't anyone else said this? I've been asking for years. And she's like, I said, oh, well, can we do it now? She's like, no, we're going to do some foundational work, some prep work, and then we'll get to it. And I was like, okay. And then, 20 years of PTSD from sexual trauma. Like, I could read a article headline that even just mentioned the R word, and I would be gone. Like, I've locked myself in my car before, in a supermarket car park. I've locked myself in bathrooms. I've been having panic attacks just because I read the word. Like, it was bad. And in 2 sessions, in 2 hours, it was gone. I've not had a relapse. I've not had a nightmare. I've not had a flashback. A friend that I grew up with knowing for years, he went to prison for similar offences with children online. And that was shit, but I was not triggered. I was like, I'm a moral adult and I have beliefs and feelings about that, but I'm not a victim. It was no longer happening to me anymore. It's right. Like in the annals of history, and that's it.
And do you know what the process was? What kind of therapy were you going through that worked so well for the trauma?
Yeah, so that particular thing, it's a mixture of EFT, which is the tapping thing. You may have seen videos and stuff of that or tried it, mixed with something called matrix re-imprinting. And both of these obviously are considered very alternative. But the basic thing that happened and what I've become now understand about it in my own training and in my own practice and helping my clients with this stuff was that when you have a trauma in your brain, and this has been confirmed by recent studies, but we've known this for a while just because of how it presents, but trauma in the brain doesn't get filed away like it does with other memories. It stays in the part of the brain that understands something is present. So even if something happened 50 years ago, your brain is still convinced it's not been able to file it away. So it stays in this present point. So when it gets triggered, your body's like, oh my God, it's happening now, even though nothing is happening now. So what happened in my own processing of that, but generally speaking, is that my brain, we were able to give myself the concluding experience to help that to finish actually processing that so that my brain could then go, oh, now it's finished. Mm. So my practitioner took me back to the morning after the very first incident when I was 10 years old. It was the morning after. I was looking out of the window at my perpetrator who was outside, like on a skateboard or something. And we were in this holiday home in Portugal. And I sort of arrived. I had this conversation in this really quiet moment with my younger self. And there was the whole conversation about, like, what was that? What's it even called? Like, I don't even have the words for that. And adult me was explaining, that, this is sexual assault. Like, it's not meant to happen, especially because you're a child, but it's not meant to ever happen. This is something that's meant to happen in a loving or consensual relationship or something when you're a grown up. Like, this is not for children, and you didn't invite this. Like, it's not your fault. You've done nothing to for this to have happened. Adults are supposed to protect you. They're not meant to do that. And we had this amazing, very highly emotional, but not a triggering conversation. And it was all of the things I needed to hear at that age. It was all of the feelings that were never expressed because I didn't even have the words to say what had happened. Mm-hmm. And I cried a lot. And when I cry, there's a lot of snot and tissues involved. It's not very attractive.
Okay.
But the release of that was absolutely just, I needed it so much. And after that, I would see something like a headline would pop up on Facebook and I'd go, oh, I'd prepare myself to have a reaction that never came. And I was like, oh, I'm okay. Like, I'm okay.
Yeah.
And, yeah. And so after that, the year after that, I retrained. And then not long after I retrained, I sold all of my shit. I went traveling, had a breakdown at the end of the traveling, came home, went back to my practitioner. She had done a master's in traumatology. She did an assessment. She said, you've got complex PTSD. I was like, okay. Okay. I was like, oh, not another layer of it to go. But again, that was like, again, really healing. It was hard work. Like, don't get me wrong. This stuff, it's not a day at the fairground. This is like, it's an undertaking. But at the end of it, I'm no longer engaging in these like unhealthy dynamics with people that I have a historical relationship with who are maybe not on the same page as me. When I come across narcissists once in a while, I recognize it from afar. I don't get drawn in. Yeah. It's like you get your brain back, you get your body back, you stop reacting and you start making choices about what you're doing. And it's just a different life altogether.
Yeah. And where I can relate to you is that for a lot of my life, I wasn't putting myself first. And I was in an abusive marriage for 15 years because I was basically, I thought my role in my relationship was to provide or whatever, and rarely thought about me. And when I started therapy and started learning to take care of myself was when I was willing to unravel all of the lies. And I'm so like, there have been times as you're talking, Harris, where I've gotten goosebumps, where I've been on the verge of tears. I'm so proud of you, because it sounds like you had a life where nobody validated you, and your parents treated you as something, as I don't know what word I want to use, but you were taking care of the other kids. You weren't in the way I would interpret that for me is that I'm not important. My role here is to take care of these others.
Yeah.
And then you ask for help and nobody helps. And then you're in relationships and even trying to get a hug, you're completely invalidated. And I just want to say it. Harris, I've wanted to give you a hug for half of this. So if we're ever in the same room together, let's do that.
I'm up for that. Thank you.
But I'm incredibly impressed with your desire to get help I'm sorry, I am tearing up a little bit. It sounds like you've always loved yourself, even if you didn't always know it. And you got to that point where you're prioritizing that self-care, and it's such an incredible fucking place to be. And I'm very, very moved by this conversation, and I wish we had hours to talk. We don't. But thank you so much for sharing. And as I'm over here, and I've got a tear in my eye, let's talk about a little bit of what you're doing now. You're out there helping others. So let's talk about that. So what are you doing today?
So in 2023, I set up the Centre for Childhood Trauma Healing, and I'm helping people one-to-one to heal from their childhood trauma, or at least do the big chunky bits in 90 days. Because, as I think I've begun to describe today, like, it doesn't necessarily take that long. Obviously, with complex trauma, it can take a little bit longer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just really magical, and it doesn't have to take years of your life. And I think this is what I want to. Yeah, I think it's normal to have that trepidation of like, oh, I don't want to go there. One of the sort of main things that your brain does when you're traumatized is to help you to avoid the triggers, because it's exhausting and it feels unsafe.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore it makes you avoid talking about it and dealing with it. But I think for a lot of us, there comes a point where you're like, I would literally give my fucking left leg to be done with this.
Yeah.
And you don't need to, it really can be done that quickly. And I'm also just about to launch a group program, so you can have support across a whole year and also get some one-to-one sessions in there as well. And it's the most comprehensive thing I found, because at the moment, effective trauma treatment, and I'm not the only person, a lot of people do offer effective trauma treatment and trauma processing, which is not the same as talking it through. But most of those people are purists. They're trained in one particular thing. They don't have a holistic view of it. And I refuse to ever fall into that trap.
Okay.
So there's a lot of educating as well as schools of thought that can really help you. So like you were saying, Scott, that you related to the whole looking after people thing. Mm-hmm. That's also known as codependency. Yeah. People use that word all the time to mean when you're a little bit kind of in each other's pockets, like a bit too close, but that's not what it means. Like from a clinical perspective, it's like that way that I was living before the cancer, where I lived 100% for other people. Yep. My sense of safety and everything came from everyone except me. And I lived for other people, all of that stuff. So I'm really wanting to bring this very different idea of healing to people, that firstly, it's their healing. It doesn't belong to a therapist, a psychiatrist, or me, or anybody. It's yours. Also to have the education to know exactly what mechanisms you're dealing with in your own brain, and to be so empowered and informed about this stuff that you know what you're doing. You know as a survivor where you're going, what you need, what type of things are on offer, and what your options are. And also just to simply know that you can come out the other side of this to the point where you are this Zen sloth who isn't really threatened by anyone and kind of doesn't give a shit about the unimportant things. And also is able to have these really fulfilling relationships with people who get it, who've been through the same thing, who are accountable, who are emotionally healthy. Because I think that's my favorite part of my life.
Wow. I'm at a little bit of a loss for words with a lot of this episode, Harris, and it is genuinely because I'm so impressed.
Thank you.
It sounds like you are in one hell of a spot, and this is some of the reason I get emotional, is because I feel like I got to a spot where I was able to say, holy shit, things are fucking good.
Yeah.
And understand that it's okay to love myself and put myself first and take care of myself. And then you can start helping others. And as much as you're right, I have been corrected on it before. Libby, I think it was it Libby who made sure to tell me on an episode that, okay, you talk about that is codependency. And, whatever it is, and I'm not questioning that it's codependency, it clearly is. It was just a matter of me not treating myself as important as other people. So whatever reason I did that, when I understood that take care of yourself, I've said it on here before and I'm rambling now, but I'm going to continue rambling to say, the old thing they say about putting your mask on first in an airplane, absolutely true. You've got to take care of yourself, and then you can do some great fucking things. And it sounds like you're doing great fucking things. So if anyone wants any of these great fucking things, Harris, how do they reach out to you? How do they find you?
Go to my website, which is mxharrishill.com, MX Harris with the double R, Hill with double L.com. And it's got a link to all my freebies, social media platforms, healing group. I've got a webinar there talking about how complex trauma is actually treated, what that's like, the different steps involved. And also a reading list if you want to tackle things like codependency, you want to have healthier relationships and be a healthier component in those relationships. As I've got a recommended curriculum of 4 audiobooks that were most pivotal to my healing and for my clients as well.
All right, that's phenomenal. I will make sure that makes it onto our site, on our show notes, so that anyone who needs to find you can easily do it. Dan, this was kind of great, wasn't it?
This is a great episode. Harris, you're fantastic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here. It's been awesome, and I've learned a ton, and I've kept my mouth shut because you're so good at this.
Thank you. That really means a lot.
I need to learn to do that. But Harris, it's been great. We're so grateful. You've clearly passed the decent fucking human test. I think I said that already, but you are here. You are a decent fucking human. We're humbled. We are grateful and inspired by you. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. It's been such a lovely space to share with you both, and you're both just so lovely to, it makes it very easy to talk about this stuff. You two are really lovely.
Well, thank you so much. I do appreciate that. And terrible listeners, remember to like our sites, our social medias at Positively Terrible. You can email us if you have a story that you want to tell at podcast@positivelyterrible.com. And the big news is we've really blown out the merch site. So we've got a big old merch site on Etsy. We would love for you to wear a shirt that says decent fucking human or Be Kind or whatever mental health merch that you want. So make sure to go find it, buy it. I know you don't want to hear this, but I am going to push it. Dan, you look like you're making faces at me. Am I talking too much again?
Yep, let's wrap it up.
All right. So, Harris, this has been great. Dan, this has been great. And as always, today's episode has been absolutely, positively terrible.
I met you back at Tonic Fest. I confess I was nervous and stressed because I thought you were the best. I was right. And that night we got into a water gun fight that I won. I shot you in the face. It was fate. I offered you a spring. You declined. I said, keep it. You might decide to change your mind. You did. Yeah, you did. Now I'm glad. I got you in my life, it's alright. If you don't wanna spring, I'm just glad to have your company. Then we got Rhino after that. Rhino was the fattest cat. Now we got Alan. I am so lucky I found you. And then I know you like the boss. Oh, I am never at a loss to find the words that I should say. Because I love you to this day. It was fate. I offered you a spring. You declined. I said, keep it. You might decide to just change your mind. You did. Yeah, you did. Now I'm glad. I got you in my life, it's alright. If you don't wanna spring, I'm just glad to have your company. Met you back at Tonic Fest. I confess I was nervous and stressed because I thought you were the best. I was right.
Positively Terrible is a part of the Terrible Podcast Network.